Hello. Good evening. That's your cue. Right. Hi. Welcome. We're glad you're here for our second faculty event of our inaugural Queer Week. Everybody having a good week so far? Show of hands. Thumbs up. Woohoo! Let's do a wave. Okay, that was really bad, but it's good. It's good though. Tonight we're going to hear from poet Oliver Baez Bendorf and printmaker Paloma Barhaugh-Bordas. Oliver will read from his book, and Paloma will do an artist talk, and then we'll do a joint Q&A with the audience. Housekeeping, again, for those of you here last night, Oliver's book will be for sale at the back of the room, and they'll be signing their book, and there'll be other books and merch and everything for sale back there also, so take a look. If you haven't done so already, take a look at our summer exhibit. Everybody we know is here. Marvelous work by former fellows. Again, shout out to East End Books for managing our bookstore for us. Restrooms are still down the hall. The sign-up sheet for Thursday's event is still over there, and it's much fuller. Good job, brave writers, all of you. If you haven't signed up yet, please do. You will really be glad you did. And finally, you know what to do with your cell phones. No, not that. Just turn them off. And now I'd like to invite Brianna Crockett, one of Oliver's students, to the stage to introduce them.
Good evening. So, just coming to you guys about my lovely workshop, teacher, Oliver Baez Bendorf's love of reading and writing first began in Iowa City, where he was raised before moving on to earn his BA from the University of Iowa. Afterward, he earned dual master's degrees in poetry and library information studies. While establishing himself as a librarian, he elevated his own writings through several books: the forthcoming Consider the Rooster, Advantages of Being Evergreen, and the Spectral Wilderness. His poems have been published in Orion, Troubling the Line, Trans and Genderqueer Poetry and Poetics, and the American Poetry Review. With these works, he has earned the Stan and Tom Wick Poetry Prize, a Publishing Triangle Award, and a CSU Poetry Center Open Book Prize. His words have been described as equal parts prayer, potion, and survival guide. And they have been praised for the way they bend language to explore how the trans body re-encounters previous selves embedded in the landscape. And he currently lives in Colorado. Truthfully, I signed up to be a part of Oliver's workshop because it sounded like exactly what I needed. You know, it sounded like seedy connections and getting to the root of things without disregarding the messiness of it all. And I hadn't heard of Oliver's work before that. So sorry. But now I can say that is no longer true. You know, I know now. As I started to look at his work, it coincided with what we've been diving into in workshop, that he is an eco-poet that cares about community and speaks to the importance of belonging to the earth, to yourself, to your community, and so on, and to the love that you produce in your life. Oliver's work plants you in his garden, and as a reader, you absorb the soil and the richness of language and imagery. It's a treat and an honor to hear his work that takes the time to ground us in that fertile understanding before taking us on an amazing journey. Please welcome Oliver Baez Bendorf.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Bree. David, Sarah, Andrea, my co-faculty. It's amazing to be here with all of you for inaugural Queer Week. and Bree and E and Izan and M and Tessa and Olive and Katie and Britt and Blue. You all are amazing. I'm so excited to have you in workshop this week. I am going to read all poems from my book that's coming out from Nightboat next year, Consider the Rooster. It starts in portrait, and then we go landscape for a while in the book, and then back to portrait. So I'm going to read a little bit of all three of those orientations. Colony collapse. Begins, last thing I want to say is there's absolutely nothing like living and sleeping and eating among other artists. There's nothing like it. I just feel better going to sleep at night knowing that you all are nearby, and I feel better getting up in the morning going to workshop knowing that you all are nearby and all just like here to practice our practice. We deserve all of that, and it's really special. Colony collapse. Begins without shelter in a storm. What I have to do next. I sleep best at anyone else's house. I like the ones that bees like. I think madness is colonization. I know grace is how I'm still alive. Shock of blue jay on an oxidized fence. I try to make a religious exception. Don't die of perfection. Heave along the goldenrod. Begin to live more together. I try to unravel Spanish ways of knowing. For example, crown on my head in an empty field. We plant lavender and let it grow bushy for the bees. Sexy how they feed on blooms. Pleasure, time, money, faith, yucca, evil, each one multiplies. We never eat alone. Come over, I will be a confidential lover to each one of you. Private things, private thoughts. We bake breadcrumbs into royal jelly. I love with every hand, horse, water, wind. If you wonder where to rear the young, if you too fall feverish after that communal feeling, swear to God when I'm dead, I'll spend years waiting for the living to call, offer wine and dance. I need everyone I love. I'm too tired. Time to feed our missing before they come gone. Third eye is a glory hole. Doors open, soup's on. Impervious. Someone stops over unannounced like the old days, so I pop open that bottle of Sancerre I've been saving. Talk turns to carp that reaches the roadway after Thursday's 3 inches of rain. How some said invasive, let them die. Others said naturalized, let them live. Someone asked for a net, and others said they'd catch them with their hands. I could never do what the raccoon does, tossing pink petals, or could I? We go to the club that turns gay only on Saturday nights. In the morning, I'm still gay, thank God. But the rain, it's returning. All I have is the woods inside my head. Minerva, calm me down. I'm trying to remember the way the deer always emerged every time I thought of them, and how bones would surface in the dirt at the marsh. I'm sniffing pine cones back to the forest floor, rubbing fingers together to make moss, smoking toward the orchard where I could never find the owl in the rotting tree. What kind of tree? I can't remember. Years pass. I'm at my desk doing a hormone shot with my cam off and trying to remember when someone in the webinar on trans femme aesthetics says they don't believe anything's innate. I laugh on mute. I too have been tossing nurture nature in my mind, though who hasn't? Now what God threw up this unforgettable sunset tonight? I step out to the deck in my trans mask robe because in the end, no one will remember. All that I've named has a life outside of me. On certain days, when the humidity is just right, I remember everything. I regret nothing. Birch tree. Who profits from this feeling? Coffee filters, clay, red string, mist machine, tempera paint, binoculars, goat's wool. The rainbow is a collection of rays with particular directions, and gender is like a cone of light opening outward. I wanted to show the way some people are so obsessed with revealing gender that it becomes a kind of constriction on an otherwise open flow of rays, creating a so-called bottleneck through which every other issue must pass. Each person has their own cone and sees their very own rainbow. It does not otherwise exist and is not located at any particular point in space. If you have accumulated something like shame, you are invited to practice every day getting rid of it. You could walk it to the edge of your body and out the door and down the street over and over and over again, however many times it takes, return to sender. The rainbow angle is the angle of minimum deviation. Who benefits from this distraction? Particulates from wildfire make their way into every new experience. I want biodegradable sex. Polypropylene, moss, human hair, pine needles, cardboard, sheepskin condoms, coffee grounds. This sculpture reveals the demand my transition has created for the plastics industry over time. By melting plastic syringes into a compressed form, I hope to create an anticlimax by showing all at once the slow accumulation of materials. When you observe me and then the sculpture, is the volume of plastic more or less than what you would expect? Do you agree, strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree or strongly disagree, that certain plastics should remain single use? By incorporating an assortment of organic elements, I wanted to create a sense of grief out of the cognitive dissonance. Plasticos, to form or mold, and art long before plastics were invented. Trans is a way of arranging the world through change, but plastic is durable, meaning it never goes away. Very light, gets blown along in gentle winds. It gets washed by rain into sewers, streams, rivers, and finally oceans. It burns forever in landfills, a campfire around which we tell scary stories. It is pleasurable at times when a container fulfills the functions for which it has been designed. I hope to return to Earth a little bit more every day until I'm finally you again. My ancestors on my father's side were part of this communal living situation in Iowa called Amana. Neither Amish nor Mennonite, but their own thing. They practiced a form of mysticism where they believed that like God was still speaking and through anyone, and so they had these like people in the community who were called instruments, and the instruments were paired with scribes who would write things down for them. They were mostly German, but with some French and Jewish people mixed in. And this poem, with this poem, I had found a passage in like this book that I have that was like a holy text of theirs. They were the longest lasting communal living experiment in the U.S., by the way. So this poem strings together a particular passage from that text, and in the poem they appear in italics, but out loud they're just sort of woven in. I just chose my place and let the circle form around me. Behold, the Lord. A neutron star had been missing for 32 years. Visible light faded gradually over 500 days. Then astrophysicists announced they had seen a hot, bright blob in the core of supernova 1987A. Wouldn't it feel pleasant to be more and more together like a neutron star? Clearly a brotherhood, since we're all exploding anyway. Might as well hedge that spinning rank. It was an agent of change. I stood there squinting into the heavens, thinking if star can also be dust cloud or nebula or black hole, then surely gender is far stranger than we've imagined and much more beautiful, unfurling over decades, a phenomenon. Exploded from a cornfield, that's me. Will you join this velvet burst? Even the Lord wants it. His will was written down for everyone to read, and he left something for everyone. The intention of the cedar wood and hyssop branch and scarlet yarn is to let it be known that it feels good to dwell in unity and pleasure. If I'm someday judged on group projects alone, pray for me. Nay, pray for you. But I wonder, will wealth be measured by what I gave away? I'm interested in the gods, their names, sacrifices, most of all what they gave up for power. Holy lightning bolts will not come from my hand, but I too am unfolding, changing. An old Amana book I read, that one with the cloth orange cover, says, before there was anything else, the communal kitchens along the river valley, the calico, the salsify, before any barn or house was built, before the mill fire, before everything that had to do with industry, there was the community of true inspiration, the church, the faith, the religion, most of all. The year I was born, a supernova exploded in our skies. I was 32 when dust settled to finally reveal its thick, luminescent core. I didn't even know I should keep the faith. So I'm here. Be a cloud with me. Remember the believers by how they plant their dead in the ground. Absolute order of expiry. Identical stone monuments bearing names and years, measuring lifespan by number of orbits taken around an already dying star. I'm coming back to me now, yet I remain in common. Come get your eggs, laid from the elements of dead stars. This next one, Stonewall Sestina, I am reading it, well, it's in my book, and also because some years ago, I was in a really amazing queer writing group with our fearless leader, Andrea Lawler, of Inaugural Queer Week. And so my day was up, and Lawler had gone the previous day, and the thing was like you were supposed to use some trace or element of what the person the day before you had sent via email, their 100 words. We all had a day of the week assigned to us. And so I picked up something from yours and wrote this 100-word sestina, which if you've written a sestina before, you know that only gives you like one extra word per line in addition to your 6 repeating words. So the repeating words in here are bricks, open, future, in, pleasure, and parade. Stonewall Sestina. Monumental bricks split open, heroic future cast in stone. Pleasure, an angry parade, loving parade. Throw bricks from pleasure to open archives in better future. My future, a parade receding in Bustelo bricks, so open about pleasure. Because pleasure portends future desire, open. After parades, make brick, trafficking in representation. In bold pleasure, my brick rubs future clay parades, I'm open. Everyone's opening up in moans. Dogwood parades toward pleasure from future gravestones. Now we've walked in the open and know that pleasure. Everything takes place in between sensations and the future of planets. This queer parade, these blessed stones. Consider the rooster, who did not ask to join this world any more than I did. Oh, one thing I want to say is that this book, Consider the Rooster, sort of came out of my experience getting pandemic chickens, one of which turned out to be a rooster, and the sort of hyper-local drama that unfolded around that. So that's where I started writing, but it very quickly kind of became about larger kind of ideas about noise and nonconformity and things like that. But consider the rooster, who did not ask to join this world any more than I did, who scans for trouble as he pecks the ground, who announces when a hawk lands in the naked maple above, who emits a low trill to warn the flock, who does this on instinct to protect potential offspring, who rarely takes a treat when offered scrap or seed, who instead yips to gather the hens around it, who sometimes does this regarding some shiny piece of trash, whose waddle catches light the way red lipstick does, who slept between breasts as a day-old cockerel, whose first attempt to crow sounded like a flopping sock, who directs with one stiff wing, who we thought would be a hen, who reminds all in earshot that, like it or not, another day has come and gone, who disturbs the interior idol of the neighbor writing lectures on environmental philosophy, who keeps the hens alive to lay another day, who would risk his life to protect, who cockfighters gas up on steroids and provoke to battle, who they then point to as an example of how violence is natural among men, whose crow can scare away the devil and rouse the dead back to life, who will provoke a strong response of humiliation or joy. God, I won't be your sacred chicken if it means I have to fight, but I will fight. I already scanned the perimeter. Testosterone, yes, I take it, which is not the same as fighting. The shape you see has nothing to do with me or the rooster, who sleeps in a cardboard box in the garage because the philosopher called the police, then asked for eggs. Do you hear that crow that sounds almost like a recording of a crow? That's daybreak. It is regular like daybreak or twilight. It rattles a certain window that matches its vibrational frequency because the glass, under all that strain of air molecules around it, finally decides to change. Okay, we're just moving briefly into landscape and then briefly out of it. Thank you. Bone dust. Every part down to grizzle, where meat attaches to bone, leaves hollow. Having pushed the world away, we call it back through language. Love thyself, thy sternum tight like a cage. W, R, and T drop acid and go to a bar inside a grocery store. I absorb this information neutrally, move toward the scary. We slipped into the crowd escaping. We were first in line to escape. We were trying to fit inside coolers or buckets, get lifted out. They mandate, show us a video, try to prepare us, we are teachers, to respond first. I know I must not be the only. Saw it coming and didn't say anything. Why? You should always strive to emit positive vibrations to others, earth, and self. Sun-filled, mouth-breathing, woodpecker in our bed, and I think he is those things. Last living form on earth. Hard to write a poem and let it fail. What kind of life to not be engaged with desire up to the very end? Isn't that what dying is, to no longer be in proximity to want? I wrote trees and non-binary. It was a typo and a source of positive vibration. Except, hang on. What did I miss? Hear flowers say no. Accept and do not pick it. Bringing back the dead. First it was the leg bone, then dark wet owl pellets, fur and bone, tiny skull with bone so fragile it flaked into bone dust, bone soaked in bleach, bone on the back porch, bone of water, bone of light, good boy bone, bone I asked permission for, may I always be ready to hear no. I offer bone as offering, I shake bone around to anyone good who may be listening. What's mine is yours, even if it's only bone dust. We live open-hearted and without fear. In the XXX fantasies, I'm the puppy. I bring back the dead as a sign of, what, surrender? Having out in the wilderness thought of you? Invoke your proximate sanctuary, string antidotes together like beads. Cat piss, rancher, rear view spider, wasp nest, dead dad blanket for the coldest nights, mountain pass, antelope, taking a shit under a rainbow in a field of ponies in Oregon. How that actually happened. I know your secret. I too have dropped tired days into my thigh. Nights and galaxies, termites of testosterone, week after week, slow as money, even slower when it crystallizes. I think you are beautiful. Small shocks I didn't know I'd open for, which is not a secret. Sometimes I imagine shapes behind my head pouring me into wood chips. Me alive, me proximate to want, useful as a body for some animal part, unashamed by its own rage. Why do you only smell like that after lightning? Way it sometimes hurts how bad. I close a motionless fist, forget to call you by your other name, small pink flag waving in the wind. Settler unsettled. One thing about this poem, in the very last line, you'll hear the word GRID. In the poem, it's the acronym for, gay-related immune deficiency disease, which is what it was called at some point. Settler unsettled. My blood, a prophet in a medieval castle with his people, flogged in the streets, books burned, driven out of town by an angry mob. My blood, his people who came and built a colony on Buffalo Creek Reservation, believing they had bought it, that their money, $10.50 per acre plus another $900 for a year of peace, granted them land, even though they had no deed. And in the house that once sheltered daydreams for the sawmill operator, now prophet, 24 years old, who possessed a gift of inspiration, could see and hear, had a scribe for when inspiration struck, thereby bridging the gap between idea and the written word, though forking off the handwritten from the prayer. Strive for simplicity. Let your yes be yes and no be no. Never take an oath. And the white men in my blood felled Seneca's trees to build villages, and for all he heard, did not hear no. Actually, yes, they left and moved the entire group to Iowa. My indigenous Caribbean blood sent kinship through the mother line, and some lived open-hearted, lay down with many as I do. And women and children lived with women and children apart from men. My Spanish blood who came and took Taino women to live with, as many to lie with, as many as they possibly could, Dr. Chanka wrote. Conquest for gold, my blood no immunity. O God of chaos, which was he, doing unto or done unto him? Got settler unsettled in my blood. And Michelle and Maria, who fled the boot spur to Montreal, where I saw a glorious drag show once. It was so sincere. Undocumented to Chicago, no papers, only prayers. Who writes this all down? Who remembers? A coffee bean is actually a seed. A deed is a legal instrument, meaning evidence. I'm out here conjuring someone else's empty stream for my side, some knowing when to leave, others removed. But every queer is the family scribe, right? Go back any blood far enough and you'll see a communal kitchen. Never went to sleep completely, kept watch, fished at night, all-night rituals to be conducted. First order of the day was ritual bathing and prayers, morning meal of cassava bread dipped in the communal pepper pot. I don't bathe every day, forget to pray, eat meals alone. I've never planted corn on a hillside during new moon or carved a canoe from a single tree trunk. Sure, I handpicked through gravel along water's edge, never found gold though. And the Spanish introduced homophobia to the Taino, and the Seneca were made to move along. And Billy Graham said AIDS might be God's punishment, and a third of U.S. Americans agreed with him. And women took care of men who were dying, and a virus infected the cells, used them as a place to multiply. Grid, it was never not my battle. Blossoming of the violet at midnight. Elemental purpose grows fruit from a raspberry beret. We could all wear them. Lines waking up in me. Lovers were of this land without being about it. Do you understand? Running low on ways to say it. And I like sitting in the same corner, eating the same food, watching the same shows. Bliss. And I'm waking up and it's purple here. Night fell and got back up again and again, rolling faster like an engine we had mistakenly built, so strong that no one could contain it. O life of many melodies, O God of Rooster song, there's something happening in the garden. And I think I'm just going to finish with one poem back in portrait. It's called New Moon Newton. Stars, whole patterns of them, rocking around in the radiant arena above and around our heads on a night when the wind sang like a scream, and the deer stood frozen as a statue of itself. The sky was dark because La Luna had finished revealing themselves and was not yet ready to begin again. And I get it now. A stanza is like a little frame, and the frame is a little crooked. Jenny calls from the road, and we talk. I walk, so briefly we together move from our faraway states, synced perhaps by the clap of hooves and burning oil. And the telephone can be a line like any other wire. So can I say it? Love frightens me. The matter it contains, the speed, the direction, even words of thanks at the reference desk from a patron, gracias, amor, haunt me in the quiet places. But if God is changed, then is it God who sent my matter hurtling back into the open? Can anybody tell me how to contain it? Clockwork. Even the moon on a calendar stacked fluxes away and comes back. Striking disclosure arrives in flashes. Thank you.
Let's have another big hand for Oliver Baez Bendorf. Thank you, Oliver. And next, I'd like to invite Haruka Aoki to the stage to introduce Paloma Barhaugh-Bordas.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Haruka, and I'm honored to introduce our next speaker and my instructor, Paloma Barhaugh-Bordas. The name of the workshop I'm taking with Paloma is lovingly entitled The Lavender Press. We forage for inspiration in the natural environment, literally gathering shoots and sprigs of local flora to tell our stories of a queer utopia through prints. As a printmaking newbie, when I signed up for this workshop, I expected a big learning curve and therefore approached the press gently with an anxious flutter. But these past few days, Paloma has shared the beauty of finding by doing, which is an important part of the artistic process. Trusting our intuition, we sketch, blend colors, press, flip the paper, press again, and in this flow of art making, I feel as though I become more and more connected to my true self. Originally from Denver, Paloma Barhaugh-Bordas is a printmaker, artist, educator, and activist who reckons with what it means to live within the complicated, blurry lines of borders and ancestral lands. They earned their BA at Carleton College and their MFA in printmaking at the Rhode Island School of Design. Paloma's work aims to portray the intersections between humans and nature, merging the two for insights on migration, queerness, and ever-shifting sociogeographic boundaries. To portray these aspects in regard to the living world around us, they utilize textiles, cyanotype, and mesh fabric printed with designs of trees, sky, and water. Their work has been shown at both national and international venues such as the Handworker Gallery, Buffalo Artist Studios, and Sediment Arts. They have attended residencies at Acre, the Women's Studio Workshop, the Kala Art Institute, and at Japan's Me Lab, and are now based in Ithaca, New York. Paloma often creates work that situates who they are in relation to where they are. And if we borrow this perspective of theirs, here we are, from all around the world, gathered in Provincetown during Queer Week at FOC, sharing our ideas in community. Wow. What a magical ground we are on to be creating art and learning from each other. So Paloma, you fill our studio with joy and wisdom, and I'm so excited to hear more in your presentation tonight. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Paloma Barhaugh-Bordas.
That was really amazing. I feel like I'm gonna cry. Thank you. How is it? Good? Okay, great. Woo! I need my timer because I'm challenged with the timing. Just kidding, it's hiding. Okay. What an honor to be here. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today, for joining me for the workshop, for the invitation. To be amongst you is truly an honor and really humbling. It is a queer utopia, to be certain. I'm really happy to be here. It's great. Am I missing anything? I don't think so. My talk is titled "Nothing Comes Without Its World," which is a quote that I borrow from ecofeminist scholar Donna Haraway. This phrase suggests that we are more than our individual experiences, and that that identity and place are inseparable. Haraway might clarify that we includes things both human and non-human, which is something that I've been working with a lot in my art practice for the past few years. So I started with this talk pulling a lot of things together from various other experiences, and then I put it all through a fine mesh filter of queerness. And so what we're going to be talking about is mostly work that I made after coming out in 2016, and the way that I started to understand my identity as a queer person, and then later as a trans person, and that perspective that I brought to my work, and the expansion of like perspective based on trying to become something more than human, but perhaps like a citizen of the world. All right, so going back to that phrase, nothing comes without its world, one of the questions that brings up for me is, if nothing comes without its world, then how do immigrants and the displaced, something that I relate to as a first-generation American, and queer people orient themselves? I do this through my art practice by connecting to place. I look at what grows in a place, the contours that shape the land around me, and the history, not just human, but the history of living beings that define a place. An important characteristic that I identify strongly with is being a printmaker. I don't know how many people here are familiar with what it means to be a printmaker or what it means to make that work, but I think I'm going to go to something that Oliver was just saying. I feel like it's a very generous and expansive container. One of the things I love most about printmaking is there's room for everyone there. I love being a teacher. I love sharing and empowering people through this art form that like always says yes, and makes room for whatever you want to bring to it. I also really love all the metaphors that go along with the making process. So prints are made darkly. And what I mean by that is they go through a printing press, which I'm about to do here at Women's Studio Workshop. The artist's hand is removed from the point of the art piece being made. And it happens in this, there's something magic about it. You pull your print up from the plate, and a lot of times there's a bit of magic that's revealed. You're also working on a surface that you transfer onto paper. That surface is called a matrix, a word that originates, or that has its roots. It's the originating word for mother. There's a lot of touch, contact, pressure, and embrace. And I'm also deeply interested in the medium because of its history. It allowed wider access than elite aesthetic forms and has a lot of links to the dispersion of ideas, as well as connections to technology and reproduction. So it's particularly special to be here with writers who I think have used printmaking as much as any artist has to spread their ideas and information. I'm going to talk about a few bodies of work leading up to kind of a community practice that I engage. But these are how I began orienting myself through my art practice as a queer person. This body is called Transplant, and I began it when I lived in Rochester, New York. I'd moved there, broken up with my long-term partner, and like joyfully entered the world as a lesbian. It was so good. Came home. Came home. I was really alone, though, in Rochester, and I was making work for a show. I think maybe some of you relate to deadlines and how that can be a significant prompt for making. So can love and crushes and all that amazing motivation that comes from that. But in Rochester, I was trying to like rebuild myself as a new person, bring pieces back together, and also reconfigure them. It's gray in Rochester, like really gray all the time, 9 months out of the year. And also if you've been to upstate New York or driven through this region and looked at the beautiful rock formations around you, that earth is also almost in grayscale. There's very little color to it, but it's a deep, dark slate. It's very moody, and I found a lot of inspiration in that. Trying to piece back together my art practice, it started to relate a lot to my domestic environment. I was trying to build community and find myself in a place where things didn't grow most months out of the year. And I started collecting houseplants, because I'm also a millennial. The houseplants began occupying my camera lens, which I use a lot, and creating compositions. I was also traveling to see family and friends in places where things grew and was like, oh my God, it's growing. Picture, picture, picture. And I brought these back to the studio eventually, realizing that what I was doing was trying to create a community with these plants. I was trying to create landscape and locate myself in a placeless space of like betweenness. I'm not a good photographer. I love being a bad photographer, in fact. I really use it as a data gathering tool, and I love sifting through things and sorting through things. And I thought a lot about Alexander's work from yesterday about pulling from the archive and what that ends up looking like. The amount of photocopies that I had to like kind of depart from when I moved from Ithaca to LA in 11 days. Was really hard, but what I kept is kind of incredible. So when you revisit what you ultimately like bring with you, the world that you bring with you, it says a lot. I'll comment briefly on how these are made. These are photocopy transfers, and it's a great process that I wish translated some of its tactility to the images that we see in slides. So you're working with photocopies on regular paper that everybody encounters all the time, but you soak it. So it's wet and fragile, and it begins to pill. It's really delicate, it can rip easily, and you roll oil-based ink onto it, which almost becomes kind of an asphalt. It's shiny, it's thick, becomes very textural, and then you roll that through the press and transfer whatever you get. The images change a lot. I was layering them on top of each other right on the press, and it's really tricky. Like you don't get another chance to do it. So there's a lot of chance and risk that was involved in making these. I was also mixing my own blacks and just spending a lot of time trying to figure out where I was going with it. I started to find this as I went along, continuing to refine how I made them and how the compositions took form, when I realized that what was happening was bodies were starting to emerge. I thought it was about plants and finding forms in those, but soon I started to see like corporeal forms. And that got me thinking about what I was really bringing to this work in terms of the identity that I was finding myself stepping into. So with leaves that look like skin and stone that resembled bodies, I started to ask myself what it meant to make art with a female gaze. And think about the value that my perspective could bring to the wider body of knowledge. That being one of art history, that is traditionally the male gaze. However, I didn't want to just position myself in opposition to that, which would serve to acknowledge the dominance of that perspective. So I don't know that I would even call it the female gaze anymore. I don't know that that applies to me, though I don't think it excludes me. But it's really queer because it's a yes and. There's an embrace of ambiguity and the possibility of the unknown. And these are all things that I really treasure in art making, is that there is never a right answer. And I think that that illustrates a lot about human knowledge. Like, we don't know everything, and every time we think we do, we discover that we were wrong. So the next body of work that I started, I had that in mind. I was really curious about how to figure out how to place myself in history. As a queer, trans, mixed-race person, I just don't see many examples of that. When I saw a lot of Jess's work yesterday, I have similar questions about what kind of bodies are imaged doing different things. I have a very diverse family. I didn't see examples of that. None of us look like one another. I think there is a sense of displacement with that as well. So through my art practice, I look for non-dominant narratives, and I have started to find these most often. I began work on this project, Understory, bearing in mind how influential place is to my work and a desire to look at location with this interstitial, queer, female, yes and gaze. But rather than a method for approaching the work or a prescriptive way of moving forward, it was instead a question that I asked myself along the way. And something that helped me a lot was thinking about, instead of, if you're just displacing that male gaze, maybe you're not making art for humans at all. Maybe you're making it for plants. Maybe I'm making it for plants. And that became a lot of fun because I really don't know what kind of art plants like. I still don't, but I'm really curious about it, and I wanted to make art for plants, but also with plants. I was also paying attention to native versus non-native, that idea of invasive or naturalized, how language we use to describe invasive species speaks volumes about how we describe our community. This brings me back to Donna Haraway, and one of a component of her writing that comes to me a lot. It matters what descriptions describe descriptions. So is it possible that the untold story of how a plant arrived in a place might just be as complex as an immigration story that we share with words and text? What if plants knew they were to become art subjects? These two pieces I really love because they're made on paper that is made from the weeds in the same place where I gathered the plants. So I think it's purple maidengrass paper with Tree of Heaven on the left. That's really, the thoroughness of those two things being pressed together and then emerging as a piece of art is very satisfying to me. I was also really trying to avoid a human-centered perspective. And I think that I need to know more about this, and it's a treasure to need to know that, and that is Riot Girl punk perspectives, because I approached this in that way, where I was like, I need to know just enough about this plant to know that it's invasive, but that's it. Like, I'm not gonna find out what it's used for, I'm not gonna find out like any other things that humans have ascribed value to this plant for, because that, again, puts it back in my perspective. I'm just gonna learn a little bit about it and then see where this plant takes me. I was also drawn to net motifs. I taught myself how to make nets. I love this permeable membrane that nets create, and also how nets, I am very grateful for writers. I just started reading Maggie Nelson's Freedom, and the byline of it is something along the lines of care and constraint, and how freedom can be both of those things. And I think that's the same about nets. And I was making these nets and printing them and drawing them and thinking about how they could treat the plants with care, how I could gather plants and hold them together, bring them together, but also how they could be contained by nets and restrained. So this ambiguity felt really fruitful to me. Haraway says, it matters what knots, not knots, what ties, tie ties. Can care and constraint be two sides of the same coin? So COVID came, and it was very humbling and devastating to me, especially as an artist. I just couldn't understand how, it was the hierarchy of needs that I faced. I just didn't understand how you could make art when there was so much uncertainty and fear and danger, how little was revealed about, or how much was revealed about the limits of our knowledge. But I kept walking. Walking is an important part of my practice, and it was a way of me just to process anxieties during COVID. And what ended up happening is I found extraordinary discoveries all around me just by looking closely. So I learned again from plants how to shelter in place, how to be rooted in place, unable to move, and yet still be immersed in the world. Again, I was asking myself, what senses do plants have? But now with the idea of these limits of perception and this extreme limit of human knowledge, and I started to try and look beyond my perceptive abilities. That summer I was at Acre in Wisconsin, and the light there is so intense. Like, you're out on these tilled fields, and it's like a yellow that vibrates behind your eyeballs. And that was helping me think about what more is there to see? The question that emerged again was, how do I queer this stuff? I really didn't know. I loved the possibility of not knowing and doing it wrong and maybe doing it right. But the way I tried to do it was reversal. That's another part of printmaking that I find really amazing. And if you think about reversal, it seems really simple. especially because we look at ourselves in mirrors so often or with our phone and it flips. But the fundamental fact is actually that like when you reverse things, they can never be put back together the exact same. So there's this separation that can't ever be undone. And that to me felt like the possibility for a lot of queerness. Like, can we see both sides and know that they're the same and different, that they'll never be back together? And that became really exciting to me. I was working with like landscape and plants around my house, around anywhere I was. I'm very curious about activating 2D space. I feel kind of limited by print sometimes, in which I'm making lots of things on paper. So I was working on creating bodies of work that made your body move a little bit more. And in the corner we have one of my quilts. I did have to cut the quilt part of this lecture, but if any of you want to talk about quilts, really would love that. This is a scissoring quilt. Okay, I hope you can see these okay. They're a little, I love these pieces and they are so hard to photograph. So these are tree shrouds that I made as a part of this. The place where I display work is also pretty important to me, and this gallery had these bays where windows were in between. They looked out onto trees, and I'd been working with a lot of invasive species, which, I mean, to give you a clue of how that started, when I first lived on the East Coast, something that astounded me was learning that the entire eastern seaboard and most of the United States has been clear-cut. But you look around and there's forests, like, nature is so resilient. It's just insane to me, though, that humans have had this much of an impact on where we are. So even though this gallery is facing a green space, I was thinking about the trees that might have been there, my audience, my tree audience, and inviting them in. So I made these monoprints on cotton that I dyed with indigo and created like a rainbow hue of monoprints of the bark of native trees. And so I was thinking about shrouds, but I was also like flagging for trees. I was also like, I want them to know that I know, and I want to, let's, you know. So there was this element of bringing desire into the, okay, realistically, I wanted everyone else who knew to know, so that was why those were there too. But that retro code is very important to me, and the gestures, the like wordless communication that we share as a community feels really valuable. Okay, quickening it up. I wanted to share a few, I think I have a few more. This is a collaborative project that I did that I would love to do again. It was called Arbor Ardor, and it was an interspecies courting ritual that I did with my dear, dear friend, Christy Gast, on Governor's Island. And we invited participants to come and court a tree of their choice and negotiate a connection with that tree, and then we bound them together with shibari rope binds. Which we thought would just be like sweet and fun, kind of sexy and strange, but it ended up producing like an amount and boundlessness of joy that I was completely not expecting. And we ended up staying and talking with each participant for like 2 hours while we ate apples that we picked and drank teas made from trees. It was really, really sweet. So I'm hoping that happens again, but this is one way in which, you know, I truly do see the parallel of print with this. It might just be because I have that in my bones, but the like starkness of creating line, as well as like a graphic way of describing space, feels very printerly to me. And then it is a repeated process. So maybe that, although it's not an exact replica, you are doing something again and it's altering slightly each time. All right, so the last thing I wanted to talk about is my queer community service, is what I'm calling it. Printmaking also, one of the primary reasons why I was drawn to it as an undergrad was because I really, really felt that I needed to communicate through art. And I needed to do that like with the biggest voice that I could muster. And so one of the ways that I still like engage that as a part of my practice is making propaganda for my queer agenda. I recently moved to LA, a place that no one has disagreed with me on this. It's really hard to make friends there. I'm not bad at making friends. It's hard. But we have something called Dyke Day, which everyone told me about for months. And I thought this was my chance. I was going to make friends. So I made patches, and this is something that I haven't done for a long time, but I usually do it if I go to a Dyke March or any kind of like pride thing that feels right, make silkscreen prints for it and hand them out. I also did it for the Women's March on Washington. It was a really empowering experience just to give them out. This was the first time that I signed the prints. And it was literally to make connections, to be like, come talk to me. To that end, come and talk to me, give me your address, and I'll mail you one. We made t-shirts as well. And so I don't know if you figured it out. It says hard, soft, hard, and wet. And then the back said Dyke Day, LA. These were made on my old duvet, my muslin duvet, which I also made and was a sacred place. Okay, so the last thing I did in prep for Dyke Day, this was almost like, and like, I don't know, sometimes the artistic impulse just like really hits you like that thunder last night. And at 4 p.m., the day before Dyke Day, I was like, you know what? We need a new trans flag, and I'm gonna make it right now. But I also wanted to bring this one up because I brought it with me. And Alexander's talk as well reminded me of things that we pull from the archive, because this piece has so many different kinds of fabric in it that I have accumulated over time from different residencies, from different projects and processes, dyeing. I mean, there's a lot hidden in there. And that's another thing that I love about writing, about printmaking, about quilting, is that there's so much labor that goes into it that's invisible. And the conversations that can emerge from that are profoundly rich. So anyway, the patched part was where I imagined a heart, because I thought the trans flag needed a bit of a heart. So this is my conclusion. One more Haraway piece. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories. Art as a practice represents, reflects, and critiques the dreams for a culture. So I think that it's a lot of responsibility that you carry making art, but it's also a way to like find yourself when you're lost, build community with those who you deeply desire to connect with. And ultimately, I hope this happens in my workshop and for all of you here, that you find the power in your voice through making, however that is, whether it's images or words or walking or anything along those lines. Thank you so much.
Please, more applause for Paloma. Now we're going to do our Q&A thing, so we have to get set.
It's a cool color.
Yeah, it is a really good color.
I feel like your highlighter shorts look great. Thank you.
I think I can do that one. Yeah.
So it's live. Ready to go. Okay. Anybody have a question for Paloma or Oliver? Because I'll start.
If you have answers, that's also great. I have questions.
If you guys have questions for others, totally fine.
Hi, thank you. That was really amazing and moving. I'm really touched by both of your presentations. And I was trying to formulate a more articulate way of asking this, but then someone had to ask a question, so I'm gonna go for it. But I'm really struck by the relationship between queerness and the natural world in both of your work. And I was trying to decide if I really think this is true, but in my experience, so much of queer culture happens in urban spaces, and there's this kind of separation from natural spaces, and we don't always feel safe in rural spaces. And for me, at least, I've had to kind of reclaim that. And I'm curious to hear you talk more about your own path to queerness and the natural world, and also any expansiveness on your thoughts about that relationship.
I'm the one from Colorado, so I'll start. I came to that question as a, like, what does it mean to be a brown person while camping? Because the experience of being in the mountains with my dad, who's Norwegian looking, and my mom, who is Nicaraguan looking, were really different. But it's still weird. I mean, it's still weird, and it's also so straight in nature. But I'm with you on reclaiming it, and I think that the disconnect that we feel is one that's really, like, that was designed. This, like, I think about it maybe more along racial lines of, like, who belongs in nature and who has the right to feel safe there, feel comfortable with it, and then who is kind of confined to urban areas. I don't know. I guess I'm wondering also about the like joy that we bring to urban spaces and the fruitfulness of that. But I'm meandering.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think we were talking about this in my workshop today, actually, about like expectations that one might feel based on like your body, whether it's like sexuality or race or whatever, about like what kind of relationship you might have with the natural world, and how to kind of negotiate that on what aspects you might want to like fulfill or frustrate or both, like in your art. I grew up in Iowa, and I had like a fairly lonely childhood, except like a lot of like companionship in the natural world. And I was living in Wisconsin when going to grad school when I started to transition. And it was like suddenly I was going through like this second puberty at a time in my life when like none of my peers were, and yet everywhere around me I looked, like the leaves were changing, right? And like animals were like changing their like seasonal coat and whatever. And so that became for me like a really powerful kind of correspondence for transness, you know? And, you know, nature is the original gender neutral bathroom. Like for me, it's been like really, it is. So I think I take like delight in that, while also like trying to just be honest about the layers of it. Yeah.
There's a lot of queerness in nature too. That's sort of the best part, is the exploration of plants. This crocodile that just made herself pregnant. Anyone? The alligator? That was amazing. Anyway, yeah, there's lots of examples of just divergence, and I think, yeah, we've tried to categorize things that actually defy category. So the openness, I think, yeah, that's what I'm always aiming for, is the openness.
Hi. I was thinking a little bit about what Paloma said about invisibility within like the labor of both writing and printmaking respectively. And I was wondering if there was any part of your work, whether it be like the process itself or the content, that feels important to you, but that you don't get the chance to talk about often because people don't ask, or don't know to ask, rather.
Wow.
Sorry.
No need to apologize.
I think it's a great question. I gravitate towards things that are a little bit invisible, like fabric and quilting. One of the things that I love about it and find frustrating and also mysterious is that you really can't trace where it came from. I mean, silk silkworms, what? Like, and then the closest we get to it is in a store. I mean, we're so separate from how things are made. What I'm getting at really is that I think an angle of print that I really love is material history. I work with a lot of really old machines and old processes, but things that are still highly relevant to, for example, creating computer chips. So yeah, material history is really interesting to me, and I think I've always had moonlight practice too. I had a clothing line for 5 years and didn't tell anyone about it, even though I was a full-time art professor. And we all have our side hustles, like how many of those I have at any given time. I feel like I'm complaining about it, but really my brain loves like moving to different stuff. But yeah, so I think, oh, you know what it is? It's like my domestic life. Like I work so hard on creating a really safe, stable, beautiful domestic space that honors material and like peacefulness. And I find it so challenging to categorize that as an art practice. That I'll share that. The quilts are like my closest. It's like my way of trying to get it in. It's like a merging. Quilting side hustles.
You know, something I've been really struck by being here is like I got off the ferry and I was walking down the pier, and there's like the art studio shacks, and like I was expecting them to just be sort of like hawking their wares, like selling stuff. But I went walking there again yesterday and was like paying a little bit more attention than when I first got here the other day. And like they were actually working in their studios. Like there was like sawdust and like painting going on, and like right there sort of like in public. And I was just really struck by that. I don't always want visibility. I feel like kind of fraught with it, and there are some days when like all I really want is an invisibility cloak. But I like your question, and I like part of my practice is like reading out loud as I go along. A teacher of mine in college at Iowa said all problems are musical problems. Like all problems in a poem are musical problems, and therefore can be solved musically. And so I'm always reading out loud as I go, and I'm therefore like not suited for writing in a coffee shop. So there are large chunks of my process that happen in private. And another part of that, I think, is that I sometimes draft things on like weird materials. Like the less sort of precious, the freer I feel. And I spent a month at Vermont Studio Center in 2016, and started like playing around with drafting poems on like the brown, like pebbly paper towels that are in the bathrooms. And when CSU Poetry Center was designing my book, like they like knew about that part, and my editors there who were like, how about like scanning some of those like for like the inside of the book covers? And I was just like, what? But I thought that was amazing and really cool and really exciting that like that part of my process got to end up being part of the book.